Um, okay, great. So we're going to be talking about Matthew chapter 8. The last innumerable number of Bible studies we did were on Gospel of Matthew chapters 5 through 7, which was Jesus's Sermon on the Mount. And what we said is this is the heart of Jesus's sort of ethical, moral teachings that he gives, and it's presented to us as a single sermon that he gave one day. It probably was, at least at one point in time, just one sermon. But on the other hand, it probably was also a collection of his teachings that he gave throughout his ministry. So remember, he wandered around for 3 years, teaching and healing people as sort of like an itinerant preacher, primarily in Galilee, but then eventually coming down to Jerusalem and Judea, where he was, crucified. And the Gospel of Matthew, it really is structured in a particular way. So it alternates sort of narrative, teaching. So the very beginning of the Gospel, is the birth of Jesus and his baptism and maybe a bit of his ministry, and then it goes just 3 straight chapters of teaching. And then now we've gotten out of those 3 chapters of teaching, and we're going to do a couple chapters of narrative. So just stories about Jesus going around healing people, and preaching his message and his interactions with people. And then it's going to get to another block of teaching. And I think the cycle alternates, like there are 5 different blocks of the Gospel of Matthew. I can't remember exactly how many. But I'm just reminding you that the Gospel of Matthew, the Bible is structured intentionally. Someone in this case, the Apostle Matthew, sat down. He had a certain amount of information he wanted to convey and communicate, and he organized it in such a way to send a certain message. Gospel of Mark is structured differently. Gospel of Luke is structured differently. Contain the same basic material, but what am I saying? I mean, there's a bit of artistic license in this. Events might get their order mixed around based on how the writer wants to structure the story. Again, if you are taking a really naive view that every single thing is perfect in the Bible is perfectly dictated by God down to like the comma and the period, it's that might be shocking news to you. But the reality is this is the text, the specific words of the Bible are very important. But there are variant texts because this is a piece of history. Anyway, just don't be scandalized by that. We're gonna talk a little bit about that process as well, though, of how the Bible, or quote unquote contradictions in the Gospels, little later on. But I'm just letting you know that you're going to see some discrepancies in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, which but they're mostly about the way things are ordered, about minor details, so on and so forth. Okay, so anyway, Jesus has finished his teaching, and now he is coming down from the mountain and going to minister to people. So when he had come down from the mountain, great multitudes followed him. And behold, a leper came and worshipped him, saying, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Okay, we'll stop right there. So, and he came down from the mountain. One of the interesting things that a couple of the church fathers, when reading their commentaries on this, comment on is the fact that the leper waited until he was done preaching to come ask to be healed, and that was a sign of respect and reverence. It's a very minor detail, but it's an interesting one, and multiple commentators picked up on that. I guess it's kind of shows the attitude we should have when we approach God. Remember, every interaction you see between Jesus and someone in the Gospels is yes, it's a specific thing that happened in history, but it's also generalizable. When Jesus interacts with a person, you should put yourself there. Okay, if this person got a positive reaction out of Jesus, well, what are they doing that he liked? If this person got a negative reaction out of Jesus, oh, what are they doing that he disliked? That's informative for your life and for your relationship with Christ. So what did this leper do that Jesus liked? Well, he was reverent, he was respectful, and he waited. He didn't insert himself, or impose himself on Jesus, but he waited his turn. And behold, a leper came and worshipped him. I didn't check the Greek, but if I'm quite sure that probably it's the word prosekinise, which is the word venerate, we mean, which in this case I think is interpreted as he fell on his knees. I don't know if they kissed. Well, no, we wouldn't have touched him, and that's important. We'll get to that in a minute. But offered him some kind of reverence. It's not necessarily the identical word. So this is, an issue and something people don't understand maybe about the Orthodox Church. There's kind of a difference between veneration and worship. It's not an absolute difference, but there are two different words in Greek. Proskinesis, which we use for veneration, which I believe is the word used here, and latria, which is worship in the more formal sense, which is worship you offer to a god or something like that. So it's not necessarily, again, I haven't checked the Greek on this, but I don't think it's using the word worship him in the sense of worship him as a deity, but more like venerated him as a man worthy of respect. That's what I believe. My interpretation. Yes.
Did you say the word wasn't for this?
Proskinesis.
This proskine.
Yeah. That's the verb versus the noun form. Yeah, proskineo would be I venerate. Yeah, thank you, Jackson. I appreciate that. Yeah. So it's saying, Lord, if you are willing, make me clean. And again, likewise, he says Lord right there. It is the same word you use for God, but it's like saying sir. It's not the same thing still is true in Spanish. If you call God Lord, you call him Señor, but you also, just saying, just meeting a guy on the street, hey, Señor, like, it's not. So, yes, Jesus is God. Yes, Jesus is showing himself to be God in this passage, and we're going to get to that. But these specific words we're looking at are not necessarily pointing to that. Yes.
So one other quick question with the proskino versus latria. Is there a verb associated with that one?
Latrevo, yeah.
Is there a difference in the action there? Like, if I'm understanding, if it's like proskino or whatever, is like when you fall on your face.
Yeah. I think I would have to do a bigger study on these words to give you a more accurate answer, but the heart of worship that's completely different between these two things is the heart of worship in the Old Testament is sacrifice. And that's one thing in terms of our theology in the Orthodox Church, we never offer sacrifices to the saints or anything like that. We only offer sacrifices of bread and wine. Even when I blessed the Phaneropitas this Sunday, I was offering those breads to the Lord and not to Saint Fenurios, even though we did it in his honor. So I would say if there's one core difference between proskinesis and latria, it might be sacrifice. Although I would have to, I'm sure some guy got his PhD, analyzing the exact differences between those. So there's probably something I'm leaving out or not understanding. But yeah.
Okay, cool.
And that's a difference between the way we use icons and the way people in the ancient world and honestly modern Hindus use idols. Is you go in and do a temple. I've seen it on videos and stuff, but they'll actually go like smash food on its face or put milk in fire. Like they will make offerings before it. We don't make offerings to icons. We kiss them, we reverence them, but offerings are to God alone. If that makes sense. It's interesting. And we offer a couple things. We offer bread and wine. We offer incense. We have like more minor offerings, like offerings light, like Koliva and Phaneropika and something like that. But it's all to God. It's not to Anyway, okay, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Now here's the really interesting word. If you are willing, make me clean. Because what was understood again among the ancient like prophets and miracle workers of the Israelites is they were doing what they were doing by the power of God, not on their own authority. They were effectively vessels for God to act through them. But he doesn't say intercede for me. He doesn't say pray for me. He doesn't do anything like that. He says, Lord, if you are willing. And this is where we get the indication that Jesus is greater than a mere prophet and is something divine. It's talking about Jesus has the agency here. The power is his. He doesn't need to get it from elsewhere. Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Okay, and now we're going to go down a rabbit hole. You thought we were getting more than 2 verses this time. Can someone hand me an Orthodox Study Bible? What we're going to look at is we're going to talk a little bit about cleanness and uncleanness. So what is cleanness? Cleanness is a concept in the Old Testament, and really we kind of still have it in the Orthodox Church, although not the same. It's not quite the same because Christ changed everything. But cleanness is not the same as sin. Cleanness is not the same as sin, but it's connected to sin. Uncleanness is not identical with sin, but it's connected with sin. The best way I've ever heard it interpreted is a priest referred to it as showing signs of the fall. Showing signs of the fall. So uncleanness was a state you could be in. You know, if you were a Jew, you're either clean or unclean. And if you're clean, you can enter into the presence of God. You can go into the temple and the holy places, and you can offer and participate in sacrifices. If you were unclean, you could still go about, for the most part, your normal life, unless you're a leper. That's a bit of a different sort of it's uncleanness, but it's a bit of a different circumstance. But you could go about your normal life, and I've heard it proposed that most Jews, most of the time, were actually in a state of uncleanness, because most Jews, most of the time, didn't have to be at the temple most of the time. They would go up a couple times a year for the major feasts and so on. I do not believe cleanliness laws apply to synagogues, although I'm not sure. But that's one thing to keep in mind. The ancient Israelites, the ancient Jews, they did not have synagogues everywhere like they have today. They had one central place of worship. It was the temple in Jerusalem. And then that was where they offered their sacrifices. That was their heart of their religious life. And it was what was proper was that they celebrate all of the feasts only in Jerusalem. They traveled there. Synagogues were places of teaching. That's where you gather on Saturdays and learn the law, but it wasn't exactly the same as the worship, which you participated in only in the temple through sacrifices. Anyway, you can go down a whole rabbit hole with the difference between ancient and modern Jewish religion, but so uncleanness, it meant you could not enter holy places and participate in sacrifice. That's what it is. You couldn't stand before God. It does not necessarily mean you're guilty, although sin did make you unclean. But you could become unclean not through sinning. Uncleanness is, think of it, you could think of it sort of like a spiritual sickness. What do I mean by sickness? It means you could contract it. So you got it from issues related to reproduction. So being in contact with certain bodily fluids, like menstruation for women, or the corollary for men was nocturnal emissions, or any emission that came place not through sexual procreation. So being in touch with bodily fluids from that, with blood, with death, touching dead things, you became unclean if you came in contact with a dead body. And if you came in contact with an unclean animal, like a pig. Yes.
Like dead thing, like touching the dead thing if you eat meat, or
That's a really interesting question. I guess I don't exactly know how it relates to animals. That's an interesting question. Jackson asks the tough question.
or maybe like an unkosherized animal.
So certainly, if you touched an unkosher animal, whether it was alive or dead, you became
They have
unclean.
like a certain way to slaughter animals that makes it kosher.
I believe so. I believe so. Yeah, there's a proper way to slaughter an animal according to the Bible, and it's a humane way. It's quick. And you have to drain the blood. But is meat the same as carrion? They didn't. I mean, the short answer is no. I know for a fact they didn't treat meat the same way they treat other dead bodies. But there's more specifically, it's human dead bodies you couldn't touch. So that's why. Which one of the prophets was it? I think it was Ezekiel wasn't allowed to mourn for his wife because he was becoming a priest. So he couldn't, touch her, participate in. She died, and he couldn't. I can't remember the details. Go read the book of Ezekiel.
Local foreigners.
Yeah, well, yeah. So there were certain professions whereby you were unclean pretty much all the time. And those were people who handled dead bodies, and they were, the lowest rung in society. That's true in other non-Israelite societies too. So it's true in traditional Hindu society. It's true in Japanese society as well. Actually, I found out about that recently, and there was a scandal whereby they were still discriminating against people who had that history, even if they no longer, were in those industries. In like the 80s in Japan or so. I can't remember the details, but you can look it up. So certain people were lower, and then the priests and the Levites who served in the temple were higher. By the way, this is an important concept when you read Jesus's when you read Jesus's parable of the Good Samaritan. The man's lying half dead on the side of the road. The priest walks by him and doesn't touch him. The Levite watches. They don't want to get themselves unclean. That's the reason. It's not just they see a guy and he looks yucky. But it's part of it, or they have no compassion. But it's the subtext of that is also they're putting their religious duties over their moral duties to their fellow man. The priest and the Levite walk by the wounded man in the parable of the Good Samaritan because they don't want to become unclean. So uncleanness is not the same as sin, but it basically meant you couldn't stand in the presence of God. Why not? Well, we said that the fall of man, is really at the heart of this, which is that, according to our beliefs, according to the creation story that's in Genesis, was that humans were in a state of perfection or near perfection, without death. We also said, according to the church fathers and ancient commentators, that if humankind hadn't fallen, our mode of reproduction would be very different. There still would be reproduction, but the way we reproduce now is messy, and it's risky too, both for the baby and for the mother. It's a very imperfect means of reproduction. The fathers say that if the world were perfect, humans would reproduce in a different way. Maybe we just divide like salad, probably not. But it would be something different. So if you were contaminated with something dead or something to do with reproduction, especially outside of a normal marital context, then you became unclean. It's not that you sinned per se, but it's that you were not fit you were not in a position to stand in the presence of God, because the fall is the antithesis of God. The fall is the result of rebellion against God. So death and this sort of thing were not compatible with being in the presence of God. I read recently while doing research for this a really good analogy, the best analogy I've heard for uncleanness. Because people again have trouble separating uncleanness from sin. But imagine you've been out pushing your lawnmower in the hot sun all day, and you're absolutely soaked in sweat. You didn't sin, you didn't do anything wrong, but I do not want to hug you. Go inside and take a shower. And that's kind of, I think, what the uncleanliness, the purity laws are. You can't approach God. It's not because he's mad at you or something like that, but you're not in a position. You're all sweaty. You need to go take a shower. And that's what they would do to get rid of uncleanness in the Jewish world. They would go into what's called a mikveh, which is a ritual bath. They'd purify themselves in a special way. I don't remember the exact details. It's in the Old Testament. And then after that process, you would be clean. And that's what that's why the ritual of baptism is historically significant, because John was preaching it as the ultimate mikveh. You get washed one time and you're clean for good. That's kind of the logic of it. And that's why it's so important to us that you only get baptized once. I acknowledge one baptism for the remission of sins, because it's the ultimate washing. And to wash people multiple times would be to imply that there was something wrong with that first washing. Okay. So that was our digression about uncleanness, but there's something specifically about the uncleanness of leprosy that's maybe a little amped up. And by the way, there's dispute about what is called leprosy in the Old Testament. Is it the same as the modern day disease known as leprosy? And many people want to say no, because the Bible seems to imply that this leprosy could spread to your house. So it's not even like an interspecies communicable disease, but your house could get leprosy too, physically, and your body. So some people want to say it was a spiritual disease or something, and that, stained your skin and stained your house and so on and so forth. Yeah, I don't know. But anyway, so if you want to look, you can turn to Leviticus real fast on page 135. Leviticus 13:45, or I'll just read it. It's just 2 lines. But there were special rules that applied to a leper. If someone was inspected by the priest and determined to have leprosy, he couldn't participate in regular society. Because he was the same way we quarantine people. He was a danger to other people. So now the clothes of the leper on whom the infection is shall be torn and his head uncovered, and he shall cover his mouth, and he shall be called unclean. He shall be unclean. All the days he has the infection, he shall be unclean. He is unclean, and he shall dwell apart. His way of life shall be outside the camp. So that's according to our Septuagint translation. I think other translations I've read, he had to shout unclean, unclean whenever he was going places, so people wouldn't risk being in contact with him. It was really, first of all, it's a painful illness. And second of all, it's humiliating and it's ostracizing. Again, there's a reasoning behind it. It's not totally arbitrary that lepers are in this position. So, but this is a really difficult situation for someone to be in, and that's why it's meaningful and noteworthy that Jesus, heals them in multiple occasions throughout the gospel. But there's one thing that's especially interesting. Okay, we'll go on to verse 3. Then Jesus put out his hand and touched him, saying, I am willing, be cleansed. And immediately his leprosy was cleansed. Now that is super interesting. One, because, sometimes our first glance, we might not think anything of it because, sometimes sacramentally, you just have to touch someone to communicate the grace. So when you're ordaining a priest, like the bishop had his hands on my head. When I doing confession for you, I have to put my hands on your head. The book says it's not cool if I don't put my hands on your head. So there's something about grace being conveyed through physical touch. But what's very specific about this, what I do, and this is why we just did the whole digression on uncleanness, is uncleanness was a condition you caught by touching. Uncleanness was a condition you caught by coming into contact, touching someone with leprosy or touching a dead body. And Jesus is, by doing this, is showing that he's sort of the opposite of the uncleanness. The way uncleanness radiates out of a dead thing, life radiates out of him. Not only does he not become unclean by touching the leper, but the leper actually becomes clean by touching him. And in ordinary human life, there aren't really many things like this. Even if you take a bar of soap and you touch it to some dirty things, the soap bar might get some dirt on it. You have to run it through water again. Jesus is really unlike anything earthly in that he radiates life. He's the giver of life. And again, so we pointed to these times. First of all, it's Jesus saying, I am willing, be cleansed. First, the leper says, Lord, if you are willing. He doesn't say, Lord, pray for me. He doesn't say, Lord, intercede for me so that God heals me. He says, Lord, if you are willing. And then if he were in error about that, Jesus would say, I can't do anything. I'll pray for you. No, Jesus does not disabuse him of the idea that he has power. Jesus says, I am willing. Jesus confirms the fact that this depends on his will and no one else's. Of course, his will is in unison with the Father's and the Spirit's. But the point is, he's not in some kind of subordinate relationship here. He's the one calling the shots, and it's his decision whether to give or take life. So again, everything is recorded for our for a reason. For a reason. If these lines are written down in the Gospels, because it tells us something about Jesus, and immediately his leprosy was cleansed. So life radiates out of Jesus. Of course, this is not nearly the only time this happens in the gospel. Another very significant one is the woman with the issue of blood comes in contact with the woman on her menstrual period. It's not ordinary menstruation. She's having, continuous bleeding. That would make her unclean. She shouldn't touch anyone. And the fact that she, in the Israelite law, and the fact that she touches Jesus, not only does she not defile him, but she herself gets healed by the touching. That's another example of how he has this. He's like the opposite of a disease. He's a contagion that gives life. It's very interesting. Okay, so and one cool thing that was kind of pointed out in reading these commentaries is these whole verses 8:1-3. Where Jesus comes down from the mountain, the leper falls at his feet, asks to be made well, and Jesus cleanses him. The commentaries point out this is the gospel in miniature. Jesus descends from heaven. People who believe in him and worship him, fall down before him and repent, and not the same as the sin, but it's an analogy for sin. And those who believe in him and repent are healed. And that's kind of a cool little, I almost want to use the word fractal. Fractal's like a pattern. You zoom in and you zoom out and the pattern's the same. And this is something you find out throughout the gospel. The whole long story of the gospel is the same. It looks, almost the same as this tiny little snippet of the gospel. Just like throughout the Bible, you have the same stories repeating again and again and again. It's like the death and resurrection of Jesus is the same story as baptism. It's the same story as the Exodus from Israel. It's the same story in many ways, of the whole creation through the fall, through the redemption, because Jesus, comes down into the world the way he comes down to the water, and he raises the world up with him. So it's the same. The same patterns are popping up again and again and again throughout the Bible, and I think that's kind of testifies to one of the divine fingerprints we see on it. It's the same reality is being communicated throughout the whole thing, in the small glimpses and the big glimpses. It's very cool. And then, okay, so verse 4, and Jesus said to him, see that you tell no one, but go your way, show yourself to the priest, and offer the gift Moses commanded as a testimony to them. Okay, so see that you tell no one. First, this is really interesting because, and this is what I tell people whenever they're having doubts or whatever issues with the faith, is look at doubts people have in other cultures. Look at doubts people have in ancient times. You understand, doubt is questions need answers. It's true, and or at least good questions deserve good answers. But a lot of times, our doubt is a spiritual condition. So one of the things that ancient scoffers were saying was, oh, the reason Jesus says tell no one is because he was actually a really skilled healer, and he didn't want to teach people his recipes. So he says tell no one. Or he was like a magician or something, and he didn't want to tell people how to do the spells he had. And now, as modern people, that never even entered our mind. But the kind of the doubts you have about Christ are kind of conditioned by the culture you're in. It's really, you think you're so smart debunking things, but it's really very much bound by your time and place. So, it's about your spiritual condition that causes you to sort of doubt Christ. Anyway, ancient scholars, yeah, so they thought, he didn't want to share the secret recipe or the secret sauce or whatever he used to heal lepers and so on and so forth. I thought it was very interesting because as modern people, that thought never even entered our mind. No, the reason he says tell no one is first because he wants it to go through the proper channels. There was a process according to the Bible, and we're going to get into that in just a minute, whereby a leper was officially declared cleansed. And Jesus is not going around the law. Remember, Jesus came not to abolish the law, but to fulfill. But he wants to follow the law, be obedient to the law, and go through the proper channels. It's not, according to the Old Testament, which we're about to read in a second, it's not the leper's duty to go say everyone, hey, I'm clean now. The leper has to go to the priest. The priest has to inspect him. And after the priest inspects him, that's how you know. Why? Because you have a witness or something. Remember, we saw, a bunch of us saw the Myrrh streaming Hawaii icon yesterday. What's really interesting, now I've heard of a lot of incidents of myrrh streaming, where an icon or religious object or relic starts exuding holy, sweet-smelling myrrh. But what's noteworthy about the Hawaii icon was it was actually verified by the bishops. They took it away. The bishops took it away from its original owner to make sure that it was, still streaming. It wasn't the result of fraud. They did some tests, various tests on it to see if this was really if this is something natural or something miraculous. And then they came back and they said, yes, this is miraculous. We have no explanation for how the myrrh is accumulating. So we still follow this process in the Orthodox Church. You need objective witnesses. It's not for you just to go out and say, oh, I've had a miracle, or if you're talking about something really serious, it's have the bishop's law. Yes.
Is there certain parameters or like environments that would lead to an icon stream, or like if a miracle was performed in front of God? Like, is there like, oh, this usually leads to an icon becoming a miracle?
Oh, yeah. So this is there's not a foolproof recipe. So this particular icon, the Hawaii icon, was just, and this is all on the website if you just want to look it up. It was just found streaming myrrh, although it was noteworthy because it's a replica of an icon that streamed myrrh in the 80s and 90s and then disappeared after the caretaker was murdered. So it was like the original icon was reincarnating 10 years later. It also happened right after ROKOR, the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia, rejoined the canonical Orthodox Church. So it was like kind of maybe that occasion. But there's another icon I've seen stream myrrh, and this was the one in Taylor, Pennsylvania. This one began streaming myrrh after it became in contact with the Hawaii icon. So it's like the holiness had like some kind of communicative property. Likewise, I know of someone. This isn't a situation where it was inspected by a bishop because it was only brief, but I trust this priest implicitly, and he had a small wooden cross that he touched to some relics of a saint, and afterwards it streamed myrrh for about 3 weeks. So it just So it does seem that holiness is a communicable property, the same way, maybe uncleanness was in the reverse. But it's not a guarantee. You can walk up to any relic with any object and put it up. Chances are it's not going to stream of it. Every once in a while, or yeah, if that makes sense. But it's not really something you can make happen on demand. It's extremely rare, and not within anybody's control, obviously. Okay, so we want to go, but also the see that you know, tell no one. This is something you see the saints say a lot, especially in the modern day, because they don't want glory for themselves. If they help someone in some way, it's for that person or for their betterment. Or even if it's meant to become known, because it's almost a joke. It happens in the gospel. Jesus says, "Tell no one," and then they tell everyone. So it's kind of, even with the saints, they're saying it maybe out of their own humility, because oftentimes they'll do some kind of miracle and it'll still be told by everyone, but they don't. It's not because they want the attention. It's not because they want to be known. Yeah. So, but go your way, show yourself to the priest, offer the gift that Moses commanded as a testimony to them. So we're going to look at Leviticus 14. So in Leviticus 13, we have the rules about leprosy. In Leviticus 14, we have the laws for purification of healed lepers. So there is a protocol. Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "This shall be the law of the leper for the day of his cleansing. He shall be brought to the priest. The priest shall go out of the camp, and the priest shall examine him. And indeed, if the leper's infection is healed in the leper, the priest shall give orders to take for the one declared clean 2 small birds, live and clean, and also cedar wood and scarlet and hyssop. Then the priest must give orders that one of the birds be killed in an earthen vessel over running water. As for the living bird, he shall take it, the cedar wood and the scarlet and hyssop, and dip them and the living bird in the blood of the bird killed over the running water. Then he shall sprinkle the water 7 times on the one cleansed from leprosy, and he shall be clean. Then he shall send away the living bird into a field. And the one who is cleansed shall wash his clothes, shave off all his hair, and wash himself in water, and he shall be clean. After this, he shall come into the camp, and shall stay outside his tent 7 days. But on the 7th day, he shall shave all the hair from his head, his beard, and his eyebrows, and his hair he shall shave off. He shall wash his clothes and wash his body in water, and he shall be clean." And there's a little more to it than that. But suffice it to say, there's a whole protocol. First of all, the most important thing is you can't just declare yourselves clean. And not just anybody can declare you clean. It has to be a priest. It has to be a legitimate religious authority. And this, I think, is really important to underline, because what it tells us is Jesus respected there's more examples than just this, but Jesus respected the religious authorities of his time, even though many or most of them were corrupt. He says it more explicitly later on in Matthew's gospel, where he says, listen to the Pharisees because they sit in Moses' seat, but do not do as they do because they don't practice what they preach. But you still have an obligation to listen to the Pharisees. So likewise, we have this in the Orthodox Church. I mean, there's a necessity for an ordained clergy. You have to have leaders. You have to have some kind of religious structure in place that's in its legitimate. Even if the clergy are bad, or even if the clergy are deficient in some way, unless they've been deposed or removed, they're still legitimate clergy, and so this is important, because there are people, especially of a Protestant orientation, who will say, "Oh, because some clergy are bad, or because most clergy are bad, then there's no point in having any clergy." And that's not true, and that's not what Jesus himself did either. He still respected the clergy and their office, even if he didn't respect the men. And that's an important thing about a clergyman, is you distinguish between the office and the man. If the priesthood which I bear is something great, and is something holy, and is something that works miracles, like the Eucharist. That I am not identical with the priesthood that I carry. If you expect me to live up to the priesthood, you're going to be very disappointed. Okay, I'm trying, but I'm not what I should be. So just be aware. There's a gap between the man in the office. Yes.
It's like how that's, I think it's one of the saints had a revelation, how that one Soviet priest that was also a KGB agent, but still had the grace to, offer up the body and blood of Christ, even though his whole.
Wow, you really remember stories I tell. I'm flattered. I can't remember the last time I told that story, but yeah, there's a story. Long story short. you're gonna have a lot. You need a lot of background. So I think this is in Latvia. It's one of the Baltic countries. It was part of the Soviet Union, but very, very hostile to Russia. And I guess around the breakup of the Soviet Union, there were Russian Orthodox bishops doing a procession, Russian Orthodox clergy doing a procession through the streets somewhere, either in Russia or in Latvia. But this Latvian guy saw them, and he saw a bishop he hated because he was certain he was a KGB agent, a KGB spy, collaborating with the communist government. But he saw the bishop radiating with light, and he ended up converting to Orthodoxy because he saw that there's grace here. But the important thing is that doesn't mean the bishop was necessarily good. He might have been a KGB agent, but because he was a legitimate bishop, he bore that grace, even if it's to his condemnation or God willing his repentance later in life. But the clergy, there's a really good. I offer this book with some reservations, but there's a famous novel by a Catholic novelist called Graham Greene, and it's called The Power and the Glory, and it's about a priest, a Roman Catholic priest in Mexico during the time when the Catholic Church is being really persecuted, and he has problems. He's a hard drinker, and he ends up having an affair, even though he's celibate, and so he does all these. But then he's also does these very great acts of the priesthood, hearing people's confession, bringing people to Eucharist, staying with the dying. So it's a really fascinating study. Again, it's not a perfect book, and it's not a perfectly spiritual book, but it's really beautiful book in illustrating the difference between the nobility of the priesthood and the weakness of the human flesh. It's powerful in that respect. So it's worth checking out. But anyway, the office of the priest is legitimate, so you have to listen to whatever I say and do whatever I tell you. Just kidding. But you have to. But also notice that it shows that Jesus came not to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. The law, the Torah, says something about how you deal with lepers. Jesus follows it to the letter. He doesn't change it in any way. He tells the leper he cleanses to do everything that the Torah prescribes, because Jesus himself gave that law. That's the tradition of our church, is that God, when Moses encountered God on top of Mount Sinai and received the Torah from him, that was Jesus, pre-incarnate, the Asarkos Logos, the fleshless word, according to our tradition. Because the Father never reveals himself, but the Son reveals himself. The Father reveals himself vocally, but anyway. Sacrifice, and notice also sacrifices are still valid because Jesus was not yet crucified. Because Jesus became the ultimate sacrifice and he abolished the temple sacrificial system. Now, I do think some of the apostles in the book of Acts still participate in the temple sacrificial system a little bit, but really sacrifices animal sacrifices of the Old Testament become meaningless after Jesus' death and resurrection, and this has not happened yet. So that's why Jesus still commands it. And as a testimony to them, that's also an important one. The very last line, offer the gift that Moses commanded as a testimony to them. So this accomplishes two things. One, by having the priest inspect the leper, it's setting a standard of objective proof, right? Someone who's not on Jesus's team still certifies that Jesus works an actual miracle. Jesus actually cleanses this leper actually becomes clean by Jesus's power. So it's objective proof, and so no one can doubt at least these miracles. You know what I mean? The miracles that involve an inspection. People have to say that well, there's something special about Jesus. He you can say, oh, maybe his power's from Satan. Lord have mercy, that's a blasphemy, but that's what some of his accusers said. But you can't say he didn't work a miracle. And number two, it makes the Israelite leaders without excuse, because now they're being they themselves have the proof that they need, that Jesus is the Messiah, and they're still going to turn and crucify him. And again, some among them, maybe like Nicodemus, remain guiltless because they still have reverence for the Lord. So again, when we say the Israelite leaders, maybe it wasn't exactly every single one of them, but overall, as a unit, they were corrupt. And yeah. Okay, any questions about these first four lines with the leper? It's amazing. There's so much in one little section, but there's also so much you need to know. I mean, if you're going to read the Bible well, you need to know about clean and unclean. you need to know about leprosy. And if you just pick up your Bible on your own and you start reading, no one's going to explain that to you. You know what I'm saying? This is why you need tradition to interpret the Bible. I mean, okay, maybe if you were a super genius and you could get a lot of this stuff just by reading the Bible forward and backward 100 times. But in my own experience reading the Bible, when I first ever tried to do it, I had no idea what was going on. And nothing made sense at all. Of course, you have to have someone else tell you how to interpret the Bible, and that's tradition. Anytime someone tells you how to interpret the Bible, you're participating in a tradition of passing down. It's just that our tradition is much longer than other traditions, and it goes back to the original source. But everyone has a tradition. There's no one without a tradition. Anytime that's all tradition means. It's handing down. It's passing down. Yes.
Lay people knowing how to read, period, is a pretty modern luxury. Most average people throughout history did not read.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. Most people heard the gospel in church, read by the priest. Yes, that's a very good point. And if you're hearing it from someone else, there's necessarily going to be an element of interpretation going on, because whoever's reading it to you is going to be kind of the gatekeeper. He's going to tell you he's going to explain to you what's going on. It's really interesting because we live in a society that's virtually 100% literate, which is not precedented. Almost any other point in history. And apparently, I've never really interacted with an illiterate person, but apparently there really is this big gap, not just in terms of what you know, but in the way you think and experience the world. There's a really interesting example. One of my professors, this is going to be totally random, but about the way this was research carried out in the Soviet Union among like some Siberian tribes, a number of decades ago. And I guess I'm going to fudge on the details, but these were pre-literate people. These were people that did not know how to read and write. So they would give them these certain thought experiments. They say, all of the trees on such and such an island are black. I take one tree and I bring it over here. What color is it? And they say, I don't know. I've never seen it. And they'd say, but they would try to give them these syllogisms like, no, we're telling you all the trees on that island are black. Or I can't remember what the specific example is. And then so like, okay, if we took a tree from there and we showed it to you, and they would say, well, we've never seen that island. So, there was something about the way they process information. Again, it's not that they were stupid or something. They interpreted the world in a different way, and it was much more reliant on experience, direct experience, than inference or yes.
It's kind of like how like there's various peoples in Africa where you'd say, okay, what a range of 1 to 5, what's the middle? They would say 3, whereas here in America we'd say 2.5 because we divide it by 2, but they, look at the numbers differently.
That's interesting. Right? Yeah. Oh, it's interesting. Okay. And there are also some people. There's people I've read about in the Amazon called the Paraha people who don't use numbers at all. They use loose quantities. Like I think they might have 1, and then they have a few or a lot, but they didn't. At least when they were first contacted by Europeans, they didn't have numbers at all. And anyway.
Can I say something?
Yes, please.
Okay, what I'm trying to do is then apply this in everyday life without being too much of a reductionist. So I'm trying to say here, one of this with Jesus and the leper and the woman, you're really talking about inclusion rather than exclusion.
Sorry.
You're really talking about inclusion rather than exclusion.
Mm-hmm.
Not being, let's say, having a presence versus a title. Yes, as a doctor, you one thing as I do, but the big way of helping, I think, is being part of their journey.
Mm-hmm.
And so, not being too much of a reductionist, if I may repeat that, I think what Jesus was trying to teach, or Matthew was talking about, was help other people. Do the good shepherd thing. Reach out, help. Don't necessarily say, oh, I'm pure now. I'm better than you in any other way.
I think that's actually a really good point. This and other stories, they show the compassion of Jesus. I mean, he's talking to the lowest of the low, people who could not even participate in ordinary society. If you're a leper, you couldn't hold a job. I don't know if you maybe scavenge or you subsist by begging. But people who are really not worth your time. But Jesus who at this point is a famous preacher with multitudes following him. He goes to them and he listens to them and he helps them. Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay. And then when you take it a step further, there's a science of my area of psychology and psychiatry is called the science of the soul by Plato and Aristotle. But then if you think of this, there's another friend of mine, Dr. Paul Dallas, he is much more into the ministry part, saving the soul, I think that way. So I'm sort of trying to get a little bit more out of that by listening to you and joining this Bible study group of much more of being inclusive in the sense of the good shepherd or reaching out to people. I don't know if that's
Yeah,
connected. Okay,
Yeah,
but there's
learn about how to minister to people. Absolutely, absolutely.
there's a science of medicine, and then there's there's religion. There are two, and just Dr. Dallas combines the two. Where I don't combine the two yet. I'm only in the medicine part of it, and so I want to broaden my learning or I guess it's a form of compassion also. When you
Sure.
get more involved with the medicine, I mean the religion.
Sure, no, physical and spiritual healing, they're definitely very deeply connected. And that's why, Jesus in his person combined both. Certainly he's healing people with physical ailments, but he's also forgiving people their sins, restoring them spiritually. And that's always been the case. There's been in the Orthodox Church, there's a long line of physician saints like Saint Mondalemon and Saint Cosmas and Damian, Saint Luke the Surgeon, so on and so forth. We have a lot of physicians in our church, like Dr. Dallas, like you mentioned, a bunch of other people. There's something they go together. There's some real meaningful way in which they go together.
Okay.
Okay. So now we're gonna move on to we'll just start this next section and then leave it on a cliffhanger. But now when Jesus entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him, pleading with him, saying, "Lord, my servant is lying at home, paralyzed, dreadfully tormented." Okay, so again, we're just to kind of drive a point home. If you just literally just read the text of the Bible without a commentary or anything, it's not going to tell you what a centurion is. It just assumes you know. That's why of course, if you haven't been taught what a centurion is, you're not going to know what a centurion is. You don't see centurions running around Roanoke or anything like that. You've never met one in your life. So this is the importance of tradition, because tradition preserves the context, tradition preserves the meaning. So the centurion came to him. And you don't even know the context in which centurions are interacting with Jews. In this case, a centurion is in front of Jesus. A centurion, what is it? He's a commander in the Roman military, and he's a commander of 100 people, 100 soldiers. So a century. I don't know what exactly that corresponds to. Of course, the ancient modern military, they're very different things. But you were in the military, Cheryl. What's someone who would command 100 people? Is that like a company commander, or who would lead a company?
The CO the battalion that I was in is like 600 people.
Oh, wow, okay.
So,
what would the rank be of the person who's in charge? You were in the Navy. Were you in the Navy?
I was more, CBs are more like Marines.
Oh, okay.
So they're on land, not sea, and we could be self-sufficient for 180 days.
Oh, okay.
So, but that would be like, they would break them down. Like Roanoke had a certain amount, just different things. It would be like a company commander.
Okay. So like company commander, maybe someone who's not, he's not at the bottom of the totem pole. He's someone important. Is what?
Like a corporal, maybe.
Maybe. I think maybe higher than that.
It would be like a ensign or a lieutenant.
Okay.
Yeah.
And of course, but keep in mind that not only is he a ranking person in the military, but this is the occupying military. So there's a clear ethno-racial divide here. The Romans are in charge, and they They did not gain this land peacefully. You know, they're conquerors. And the Jews are underneath. They're the conquered. They're the vanquished. So not only is this guy someone important within his own society, but his whole society is above Jesus' society. This is someone. He's not a Jew, and that's noteworthy for this passage. And he's Jesus' social superior. And the centurion comes to him, pleading with him, saying, "Lord, my servant is lying at home, paralyzed, and dreadfully." Hey, we're having a Bible study. What's up? We're having a Bible study. You want to learn the Bible?
Yeah.
Okay, come on in. So, Jesus is the centurion is Jesus' social superior, and but this person is coming to Jesus, pleading with him, saying, "Lord, my servant is lying at home, paralyzed, dreadfully tormented." So you have to understand that this interaction was strange for the people observing it. You know, it's like maybe one of the closest analogies is if some kind of Nazi officer was going before a rabbi, you know, in the 1940s Germany or whatever, and asking him for a favor. It's the superior person is lowering himself to go speak to the inferior person, and of course I think we experience this a little less because our society now is not formally stratified by class, right? You know, I'm trying to read the Brothers Karamazov right now about 1800s Russia, and what's really interesting is there's just a division between the peasants and the nobles, and the peasants just don't have the same rights as the nobles, and the nobles can just treat them kind of however. It's just kind of accepted. It's certainly there's class division in the United States, but it's not like as rigidly stratified. There's one scene where one of the nobles, Mitya Karamazov, is trying to give the peasant a whole lot of money, and the peasant won't take it because it's not his place. You know, it's really interesting. People think differently, you know, back then. So, Lord, my servant is lying at home paralyzed. Well, first of all, notice that the servant is the centurion's slave or servant, but and so it's someone of use to the centurion, but he has shown compassion for another person. The centurion is coming on another person's behalf, and it's his social inferior. So this is another way in which the centurion is showing humility, and I think that's going to be very important. And he's lying at home paralyzed. By the way, the particular symptoms, the particular sicknesses Jesus heals people of in the Bible are noteworthy. There's metaphors hidden in there. You know, he heals people who are paralyzed because we're sort of paralyzed by sin. We're trapped in many times in the way of life we live, where we're totally absorbed in the pleasures of the flesh and worldly things, and we're unable to break free except by his power. He gives us the strength to break out of them. Likewise, he gives blind people their sight. Why? Because they don't see reality as really is. You know, if we don't see Jesus as the creator, if we don't understand him as the Lord of everything, then we're blind. There's a degree to which we don't see things properly. So he gives us our sight. But there's a contradiction here, and there's a contradiction. What is it between here and the other gospels? And this is what I wanted to talk about before we close on this. And this is really important, I think, for the way I understand things. So this same episode is recounted in Luke's gospel, and it includes some noteworthy differences, which are in Luke's gospel. Luke sends the centurion sends emissaries to Jesus. He sends people to speak to Jesus on his behalf, and it doesn't Luke's gospel doesn't preclude him coming in person, but it certainly does not outright say it. It says the centurion sends other people. Second of all, Luke's gospel says that the servant is sick and dying, whereas Matthew says is paralyzed. Doesn't say anything about dying. Luke's gospel says he's sick and dying. And this is interesting because these are the contradictions that, quote unquote, contradictions that you find throughout the gospel. So I'll have people come to me and say, well, the gospels, they're full of contradictions, right? And if you really want to talk about the contradictions of the gospel, the vast majority of them are like this. Well, did the centurion come in person, or did he send people on his behalf? Was the servant paralyzed, or was he sick and died? Notice, I mean, these things can be reconciled, and that's kind of the approach the fathers take, is they say, well, first he sent emissaries, and then he must have come himself, or whatever sickness he had paralyzed him, and also he was on the verge of death, and that's why the centurion came. So these differences can be smoothed over. But this is noteworthy because there are other quote unquote contradictions in the Gospels, like, how many angels were in the tomb? Was it 2 or was it 1? How many demoniacs were there in the Gadarenes? Was it 2 or was it 1? These are kind of the different ways in which the Gospels contradict each other. And these, as you can tell, or hopefully you understand, these are not huge contradictions. First of all, I mean, it is important because we do believe that the text of the Bible is inspired and the differences matter. But the honest truth is that I'm not really losing sleep over any of these. So you have to, when people are going to tell you that, the Gospels are full of contradictions, go and dig in them yourself and see what they have to say. Now, there are difficult passages here and there. I won't say, but when people, but a lot of them are extremely minor and kind of, I think people only exaggerate them to make a big deal. What would be like some serious contradictions? Well, what if one of the Gospels said Jesus was crucified and another said he was stoned? What if one of the Gospels said that Jesus rose in the flesh and the other just said he went into heaven, but his body remained in the tomb? These would be big contradictions. But these are not what we have in the Gospels. The Gospels, they're actually, in broad strokes, really quite consistent with one another, including with John's Gospel, which is the most different. What if there are all kinds of things? Jesus says he's the son of the Hebrew God. What if in one of the Gospels it says the son of Baal or something? The son of one of the other ones, I can't remember. If you compare the quote unquote contradictions we have with the contradictions you can imagine, you realize actually the Gospels are pretty tight. They're pretty they're sewn up pretty well. Yeah, there are issues and there are things that require interpretation and so on and so forth. But don't miss the forest for the trees. Don't miss the overall picture, which is a picture of harmony and cohesion for little things you can pick out. I think that's very noteworthy. Yes.
There's no theological contradiction.
Right. There's no there really are no glaring theological contradictions. There are differences in emphases in certain places, but they all include statements, really closely identifying Jesus with the Father, like I and the Father are one, and so on and so forth. Some people will try to pit the Gospel of John against the other 3 Gospels and say, that's where they get the idea of Jesus pre-existent God, and the other gospel. But even then, like I said, in the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus says, I and the Father are one. That's pretty darn Trinitarian. You still have events like the baptism, where the Holy Spirit descends upon him and the Father's voice speaks from heaven. It's all there, even if one emphasizes it maybe a little harder and another a little more softly. Yes.
My favorite little proof for Jesus's deity is when he's being tempted by the devil, during the 40 days. And he says, he quotes the part of the Bible where it's like, you're not supposed to tempt the Lord your God. Well, why would he say that? He wasn't trying to blame himself.
That's interesting. That's really interesting. Yeah. That's really fascinating. Although I do think there's a little thing going on in the Jesus' temptations in the wilderness we've talked about. Jesus is not confirming to the devil he's God. I think he's leaving his identity a little ambiguous because the devil's not sure. The devil's not sure. That's why he says, if you are the Son of God, he's trying to get him to overplay his hand, basically. Because that's what it says in the hymn of the Orthodox Church. Or actually, not just in the hymns of the Orthodox Church, but it says in some of the epistles in the New Testament, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory if they knew who he was. Satan is not omniscient. Satan knows a lot, but he's a lot more than us, but he's not omniscient. Okay.
I think it's fascinating to me how there's 4 different books written by 4 different people, 4 different places, 4 different times, and then line up with like 98% of everything.
Right.
Right. It's like the little contradictions. It's like,
now there is some evidence that there's some literary relationship between Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They probably used each other for material to a certain degree. There are ways we kind of infer that, but that's normal. That doesn't undermine it. But I'm just letting you know that they weren't written like. They were aware.
Totally independent.
Yeah, exactly. They were aware of each other's writing, and probably, or the first 3 were. But then John is the historical understanding of the Gospel of John is that it was written much later, and that he was filling in the blanks. And once you understand that, you read the Gospel of John. Oh, it's very clear. He's like, why did why did all the people turn out for Jesus so heavily on Palm Sunday? Oh, it's because they were going to see Lazarus. John adds that detail, is that they were, why did the whole city get whipped up? Well, they'd heard a man had been raised from the dead and they wanted to come see. That's what got them real excited. Okay. I think we're good here for right now. We've hit an hour and I don't want to keep you too much more. Is there any other questions, comments, concerns? We'll do the centurion servant next time. Okay. Lord, now let your servant depart in peace according to your word. For my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared in the presence of all people, the light for revelation to the Gentiles and the glory for your people Israel. Amen. God bless you guys. Thanks for coming. Nice to have you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let me end the call and then. Oh, sorry. I have to end the recording first and then.
Okay, I just am saying thank you again. I think I was looking at some of this